Pomegranates are lovely, but they always remind me of it's the single saddest week of the year at the farmer's market. It's like one week there are peaches and tomatoes and the last of the muskmelons and everything and great basil, and then the next week you go and it's pomegranates and persimmons.
And what's wrong with pomegranates and persimmons?
A pomegranate is lovely, but it will never be a peach.
That's true. That's true, but it's just, I found out tonight that this is a very special night for the Chinese. This is the harvest moon, and they eat moon cakes today, and someone brought me one. And it was delicious. And I'm just very pleased to be here on this auspicious night and holding a pomegranate that was given to me last night by Ron Finley. You know who Ron Finley is? The guerrilla gardener of Los Angeles. But he grew it.
Gangsta gardener.
The gangsta gardener.
He's as unlikely a Persephone as exists, perhaps. Anyway, I think that I'm required by morality, if not by law, to read an encomium. So, you heard all the usual stuff that, Chez Panisse, the edible schoolyard project, that she received the National Humanities Medal. That's a big one. The French Legion of Honor, the WSJ Magazine Humanities Medal, 3 James Beard Awards, which should have been 9 at least. That's just, considering that's not enough. The vice president of Slow Food International, which I'm sure we will be talking a lot about lately, and the author of 13 books, which is to say, she hasn't just written 13 books. If you go into the kitchens of anybody whose cooking you really care about, you will see at least 7 or 8 of them, and that's, right next to the Paula Wolfert books and the James Beard and the Marcella Hazana. That's as big an accomplishment as I think a cook can have in this country. If you've eaten anything good lately, chances are that Alice has had something to do with it. Either by running the kitchen of the restaurant that you're eating it in, or training or inspiring the cooks, or inspiring the recipes, or somehow being behind the institutions, not least of which are great bakeries and farmers markets, small farms, organic standards, and the insistence that good food is an important part of good living that somehow makes the good food possible. When I used to write for the old California magazine, I once wrote a cover story on what I called urban rustic cuisine, which was to say old European tastes being revivified by California cooks in the big cities. It was important. They all tasted good, and I probably could have retitled the article, Chefs Who Take Alice Waters Seriously. When I was a gourmet tasked with this chore of, it wasn't a chore, it was a best job in the world of cataloging the best 50 restaurants of the country, I put Chez Panisse exactly where it should have been for the first list of this, which was at number 1. We got a lot of blowback for that choice. The Guide Michelin doesn't like Chez Panisse nearly as much as it should, considering that she's perhaps the premier Francophile of the United States and has the Legion of Honor. Because part of it was largely because Alice was neither French nor male. Her kitchen was laid out among humanistic lines rather than following the industrial revolution tropes of the post-Escoffier kitchen. And you could spend as much time in her as you want in her kitchens, and believe me, if you're allowed even a second in there, you should grab the opportunity. But you won't see a CVAP, or you won't see an immersion circulator, and and you will not see
The salad spinner.
I mean, and the food revolution she led in Berkeley may have been responsible for the modern taste in bread. I mean, the rustic loaves of Acme, which inspired Nancy Silverton and everyone else, began in her kitchen. For the wines of southern France, for foraged vegetables, and for old breed fruits and vegetables. The finest cheese, chocolatiers, meat producers, and chickens arose directly from the specific needs of her kitchen. If food now has to tell a story, in addition to just tasting great, I think that Alice has a lot to do with that too. And with the Edible Schoolyard program, which she's been doing since 1995, which has been one of her big focuses, she's trying to do no less than to raise the level of culinary literacy in the United States. Familiarity with both the kitchen and the garden, but no less so than literacy at the table, where families are nurtured, love is born, and a sense of community passes from one generation to the next. I think there's nothing more thrilling than sitting down to a table with people I love, and I'm glad that Alice has managed to pass that sensibility on to the restaurants of now and I hope the future. In coming to my senses, the lovely memoir that I'm not holding up correctly, you talk a lot about your childhood in New Jersey, which you seem to have perceived at the time as an ordinary or possibly less than ordinary childhood, as almost every child does, but the simple pleasures of it became extraordinary in retrospect.
That's true. It is true. When I started writing this book, I just was reflecting in a way that I never have before. And I worked with two very good friends. One of them, 35, who took dictation, and the other one, 60, who I've known for 30 years. And so the two of them together, they would say, well, what is it about your family? And was your sister really like that? Why didn't she like you? Why was she so annoyed to share a room with you? You know, and I just followed along and tried to, I mean, they really got me to recall the details of my childhood. And when I couldn't recall them, I called up my sisters and I said, do you remember about that? The picnic that we went to in Vermont? And they would help me recall.
What sort of things were you learning about yourself?
Well, I guess I've been pretty determined my whole life to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want to eat dinner that didn't taste good.
Sensibly enough.
My mother, sadly, was not a good cook. Not a good cook. But my parents had a victory garden during the war. and they planted lots of corn and tomatoes and peppers in the summer. And I really love them and still do. Jersey tomatoes have a special place. But I think the thing that surprised me most was that I spent so much time out in the woods. You know, at the beginning, I mean, that was just what we did. Every day after school, we'd go play in the woods and walk up and down the streams, and climb trees. And as I got a little older, we played spin the bottle. But it was just being outside. And we didn't have a television until I was probably 7 or 8. And so there wasn't watching television or really anything to bring you inside, even when it was snowing.
Yeah. Your father worked in the city. Did he ever talk about why he decided to move and have his family live in the country?
Well, it wasn't really so much the country then. I mean, it was a town that was small but surrounded by woods, as most of the little towns in New Jersey along the train line into New York. He worked in Newark.
Mm-hmm. And did he anticipate that you would be spending as much time, you know, outside learning as much from the trees as you were from books?
Did my father think that? I'm not sure even. He was working always. I mean, he never took a vacation until we were about 12. He just took no time off, and so he would get home just in time for dinner and have a scotch and water. Mm. And but he was very, you know, he wasn't engaged with us in a way that he didn't know what we were doing all the time. I'm not sure my mother did either.
Yeah, there's a memoir I like by a evolutionary biologist who talks about growing up in Florida, and he did the usual things in school, but he seemed to have gotten, or he claims to have gotten, most of his education by going out into his Florida backyard and with a magnifying glass and looking at ants. And in fact, he later became like the world's foremost ant physiologist.
Well, I figured that some of this came from the fact that my mother dressed me as the queen of the garden. For a costume contest at the local park. And, you know, I had an asparagus skirt, and I had lettuce leaf top, and I had, you know, a crown of strawberries on my head, and little peppers, bracelets, and anklets, and I think I won first prize. But I'm sure that sort of connected me in some way to that Victory Garden.
When you were living in Berkeley, bringing up Fanny, did you have a garden for her too?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I very strategically planted it so that she would discover things on her own. And there was we made a teepee bean house. And she would just go inside there and just pick off the beans from the inside and just eat them raw, which was so perfect. And I planted fraises de bois just in between other things around in the garden, and she would search for them and pick them and learned how to pick them exactly when they're ripe. Trial and error.
Perfect. And it was sort of a huge shock to you when you were uprooted and moved to Michigan City, which was nothing like where you'd come from.
It was a shock to move when you're in high school, to go to another school in town. It was much bigger than Chatham was, and I was very unhappy being there. So I did a lot of drinking. And I don't remember really anything from that time. But it was very strange because the high school that I went to had a tracking system. So you were in classes. You were never in classes with all the basketball players. You were in a whole other stream. And Grapes of Wrath was banned from the school.
Ah.
So it was, I don't think I don't remember studying. I think I probably did, but that wasn't my focus.
And the sort of California that we all think of you exemplifying probably didn't have much to you going to Van Nuys High, which I didn't know before this. I should have. I mean, I think Eleanor Bertino told me about it, but there's a disconnect.
Well, it was my senior year, I guess. And I had a very good report card from Michigan City, Indiana, and they put me in the advanced placement classes connected to UCLA. And I tell this story in the book, but I have never been so embarrassed in my whole life. We were asked to write an essay about something we knew about really well, and I wrote an essay about water skiing. And the teacher asked me to read it in front of the class. And I realized right in the middle of reading it that I didn't know, it was so inappropriate to have done that. And I just, and I sat down, and the guy behind me, who was the student president of the class, said to me, "And what was that? What language were you speaking?" What was that?
And do you think that was because you were nervous, or just because?
Oh, well, I was just so self-aware that I had written something, so frivolous, and so I'm not sure why the teacher asked me to read it. I don't think he really meant to embarrass me, but I just never have gotten, well, I think I'm finally getting over it. Finally, as I appear on stage.
Yeah, I never quite gotten over not being allowed into honors English in high school, so I think I know what you mean.
Alas, who knew?
And you were dreaming about Boys' Song, which was, but what else? When you were in high school, when you were living in Van Nuys, what were you dreaming of? What was your fantasy? What did you think would become?
Well, I didn't think I had one. I was determined to have that president of the class who embarrassed me fall in love with me. So that was my preoccupation for the whole senior year. And at the time, he was sending books to Kenya. And I was determined to send more books than any other student in the school, to gather them and bring them over in big boxes and put them on his front doorstep.
Do you remember anything you ate in Van Nuys in the early 60s?
No, I don't remember anything, but no.
You never went to Beep's Drive-In?
I remember Hamburger Hamlet. That was kind of the first really good hamburger I'd ever had. Is that still around? It was in Westwood or something
sort of,
like
but
that.
it's gone through like 10 different corporate things in the last 10
Grass-fed
years.
beef, of course. And I worked in Bullock's Tea House. And I was making sandwiches in the back, and apparently I was a waitress too, but Eleanor told me that I was a waitress. I don't remember that part, but I do remember making these crab sandwiches, and they did it all the real way. They boiled the crabs, we had to crack the crabs, we had to take the meat out. It was very homemade bread, and Miss Wanda ran the tea house.
Did you ever get hungry for those sandwiches?
Do I?
Yeah.
Well, I've thought about it. I thought about her precision in making them. You had to put just this much mayonnaise, just that much crab. It's very, I think.
I went to a dinner a few weeks ago in Wellington, New Zealand, where the cook, Ben Shuri, had been the cook who has a very famous place in Melbourne now, but who had been a cook for for a minister in the government, and she loved these crawfish sandwiches, which are more like lobster, with mayonnaise and a very particular kind of white bread with a crust cut off.
That's right.
Cuts and he made them for this dinner he was doing, and he confessed that it cost him $2,200 to buy the crawfish for these sandwiches.
How many sandwiches did he make?
I mean, these were really good crawfish, but it's, but I could see how a crawfish sandwich or a crab sandwich would be something you would dream about.
I do. I think I more think about a Chez Panisse crab salad. but
I actually dream about the Chez Panisse egg salad, and I hate eggs.
eggs. Do we make egg salad?
What? Well, your egg salad is like a step above. Anyway, a good egg salad. You seem to have disliked so much about school, yet you became obsessed with education, not just culinarily, but also with Maria Montessori. How do you think one leads to the other?
Well, I had a great third grade teacher, I write about her in the book, Mrs. Mead. And it turns out her son has come to the restaurant recently and connected me back up with her, and she's in her early 90s. And she's so proud of me. And, but she carved birds and painted them. And all of her classes were very interactive. And we would go on bird watches on the weekends, and she had us doing nature books, and I don't know, I just fell in love with that class and the way that she taught it, and certainly a big part of what my interest is in Montessori. It's an education of the senses. It's hands-on. It's what edible education is all about. And in fact, I think we all know that interactive, experiential education is the best way to teach, yet we don't do it.
Yeah. My son's school does a bit of that. For physics, they have to actually figure out build the machines and figure out the physical principles, and then they're told what the equations are, and actually they do know them.
Yes,
and they feel them as opposed to memorizing.
Well, that's what Montessori is all about. You know, those beautiful materials that she has for counting, pushing a bead over as you learn how to count. When you're matching colors, we used to have cylinders for smelling, matching up aromas, and you'd have to smell them and put them together. I just really believe in that way of bringing information into your mind through all of your senses. And it's what happens with food. You're smelling it, you're tasting, you're looking, you're even kind of hearing it, touching it, and it means you're really experiencing it.
Was there a point when you realized that your knowledge of Montessori and your sort of love of experiential things that you found from your teacher started to express itself through cooking, through culinary things?
Well, I've always, run the restaurant that way. She called it preparing the classroom, so that these kids, when they came in, that they would fall in love with something in the room. And I've always thought about Chez Panisse that way. I've always wanted it to smell good. And when it doesn't smell good, I burn rosemary, run around the restaurant like a priest with incense. But I think it's important that when you go into a restaurant that it smells good. Isn't it really, really important?
Yeah, there's a new particular kind of restaurant that you go into and it doesn't smell of anything.
I know. Then you walk out.
Sometimes they're very good restaurants. They tend to be less meat-oriented than other restaurants. Or maybe the smell will be of 6 different kinds of brassicas, boiling or simmering. But instead of the smell of fire and the smell of char and the wonderful sort of browning smells.
But it can be bread baking. It could be making some kind of pastry. It's a way to bring people to the experience subliminally. And it's a way of kind of winning people over before they know that they're being pulled in.
There's a cocktail bar in Los Angeles. Do you know the Walker Inn? Have you been there?
I haven't.
They actually ran for 4 months a Alice Waters inspired menu. They called it the Alice Waters drinks menu. I can't believe they didn't invite you in.
Why couldn't they invite me? I'm very sad.
But one of the things they did was a drink that was flavored with just a little bit of bitter orange peel, like a marmalade. Uh-huh. And before you drank it, they had distilled into a mist the smell of baking bread, and they would spritz the baking bread smell twice over your marmalade cocktail.
Oh my God, was that a good experience? I can't imagine.
It was lovely. I can't believe nobody.
Nobody told me about that. No, I've never heard about that. But I was just thinking, even the mixing of a cocktail, the sound of the ice, you know, when you walk in a bar, that thing happening, and it gives you the impression that things are being made by hand, that it's just not being poured out of, you know, a bottle, that something is going on. People are making things.
And you can tell when you walk into a bar, I mean, you could have your eyes closed, and you can tell by sort of the crispness of the shaking whether it's going to be a great bar, whether it's going to be an okay bar. And
I'm a wine drinker, what can I say?
But when you're going into other people's restaurants, I mean, what besides smell?
Am I looking for?
Yes.
Well, I'm looking for a kind of conviviality in the room that's not drowned out by too much music. It's really something I'm very sensitive about. I really like it when people seem to be having a good time. It's very important to me. It's important to me that the waiters smile and say hello, the welcome that happens. Of course, I like to be able to walk right in the kitchen and see what's going on. But, and sometimes you can really do that now. There's so many restaurants with open doors to the kitchen. I think that's something incredibly positive that's happened in the last 20 years.
And Chez Panisse is designed so that you could sit and, if for the right place, you could actually look in and see the entire kitchen while you're eating.
Absolutely. And you can walk right back there anytime you want to and see if we're doing it right. Mm-hmm. Or ask for more.
and I've got to commend the people that work. They have like the sixth sense almost, so that when I was 24 and could barely afford it, they knew that I wanted to sit and I wanted to look into the kitchen. I mean, they wanted to talk to me about food and music and wine. And I know on other occasions you go and they just sit you in the back and they give you good food and they leave you alone. And that sixth sense, I think, is invaluable in the staff of a restaurant.
That is important, that they make you feel at home. And I wanted a restaurant in a house for that reason, so that you were inclined to be at the table with just this one menu. Maybe I should read. Maybe I should read the beginning of the book, just because I think the way that I cook is really the way that we cook at Chez Panisse. And so, what do you think? Should I do that?
Please do.
Here is how I cook. First, I'm at the farmer's market, buying a bunch of French breakfast radishes, the purple fringed lettuces, the spring garlic. And I'm thinking about the state of the Blenheim apricots and the Santa Rosa plums. And I'm looking for fruits and vegetables that are perfectly ripe. I'm not necessarily thinking about how the ingredients will go together. I'm just responding to what I'm finding. It's a lot about aliveness, a lot about color, the smell of things, the look. I'm listening to what the farmer has to say and what's going on in the fields. I think we forget sometimes that food is alive, and we have to follow that intuition and treat food as a living thing. At this point, I don't quite know what I'm going to cook, and I'm not really putting the meal together. It's when I take the ingredients home, unpack them from my basket, and spread them out on the table in the kitchen, That's when I start imagining how the ingredients relate to one another and how they can come together to make a menu. I'm using all of my senses. I'm smelling the garlic, tasting the pungency of the radishes and the tartness of the vinaigrette, feeling the firmness of the apricots. I'm thinking about the people who are going to sit at the table and what they like to eat, the courses following one another. What kind of day is it? Whether it's cold outside and I want to light the fire in the fireplace, or whether it's warm and I just want to sit outside by the herb garden. I'm improvising, trying to capture and express that moment in time. I'm letting my senses lead me. It's how we cook at Chez Panisse. It's how we've always cooked at Chez Panisse.
I'd like to point out that pomegranates did not come up once.
It was springtime when I wrote this. It was spring.
Yeah, I've always.
But,
Oh, sorry,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
just talking about that, when we decided that we were only going to eat in season, it dramatically changed the restaurant in a beautiful way. And it changes my life in a beautiful way. Yes, I'm sad that I can't have another peach or a tomato, but I love what's coming next, and I haven't had pomegranates for a long time, and I'm looking to see what can happen in the fall, and I'm already anticipating, and it's that waiting instead of eating, just not good fruits and vegetables all year long. That when the really good thing comes around, you're bored with it. You don't even want it. And I like to just wait and wait and wait. And then when I have my first tomato, I'm just in another place. I'm thrilled, and I'm eating it just at its peak. And that's the excitement of connecting to the time of year, and just being in your, I don't know, that beauty of nature.
There is something about being able to either make a meal at home or go to a great restaurant and know from what's on your plate exactly where you are geographically and exactly probably to the week of the year.
No, it's true. I mean, when a restaurant serves food like that, I'm thrilled when that happens. When I couldn't be any place else except New York in November.
So many apples.
I know people think that there's nothing to eat on the East Coast in the winter or in Maine for sure, but I find that there is always something. It's whether you have smoked fish, whether you have dried fruits, whether you made a mulberry syrup in the summer and you saved it to the winter. There are, those great early girl tomatoes that you cold feed in the summer, and you have them all winter long. And it's just learning to really see the variety of any season. I mean, there are every color of turnip now. There are all the root vegetables, the beets and golden and pink and red, and I mean, you can make a winter meal that's as beautiful as a summer one.
I kept thinking when spending a couple of weeks in the kitchen of our mutual friend Odessa Piper, who used to have the best restaurant in Wisconsin, in Madison, and who in her way was as responsible for the growth of the great Madison Farmers Market as you were for the one in San Francisco. And because she's so much farther north, the seasons are so much shorter, and there are so many things that are literally in season for 3 or 4 days, and you have to capture them while they're there, and then you put them up and you freeze them, and you do whatever you can to preserve that one tiny flickering moment of summer. And in California, it almost seems like cheating, right?
Well, when you get right down to it, especially in Northern California, we don't have, we have this window for mulberries, and it's about maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month. But we take all the mulberries we can find, and we make mulberries here for the rest of the year. I mean, it's just so precious, that taste, so subtle and beautiful.
And people like us look wistfully at where the mulberries were in the Santa Monica Farmers Market because they've all been bought by chefs at 7:30. But no matter.
You just have to find the guy with the mulberry tree and go out there in the morning. That's the way. But we get Kishu tangerines from Jim Churchill's farm in Ojai, and they are just, that season is about 6 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and they are so wonderful. And I give them as presents to every day in the fruit bowl of the restaurant. I call it Kishu diplomacy. I send in the middle of winter to every politician I'm trying to persuade a box of Kishus. And I say, these are just a little taste of California for you in the snow. And every one of these people has written back to me saying, thank you. Not absolutely convinced of what I'm trying to do, but predisposed.
Have you actually sent Mitch McConnell tangerines?
Now there's a thought. Never. I'm what can I say? Speechless.
And forgive me if I'm getting the number wrong, the 25th or the 30th anniversary of the restaurant was held outside on the campus at Berkeley. And it was an extraordinary day, and the food was great. Everybody you talked to was interesting. But when you got up to talk, you were as passionate when you were talking about Mario Savio and the free speech movement as you were even talking about, your own legacy. You write a little bit about that in the book, but just what did that unlock in you?
Well, I dedicated the book to Mario Savio, so he made a very big impression on me when I was there. I arrived in Berkeley in 1964, front and center on the free speech movement, and I had no idea about the politics of the day, and yes, but very peripherally. And somehow his eloquent speaking just captured me. He was an orator in the first circle, and he was dreaming up an ideal world that we were going to live in. We were going to change everything. We were going to stop the war in Vietnam. We were going to address the issue of civil rights and free speech. And he was, I found out later, I didn't know, but he was Sicilian. And he drank a bottle of wine every night at the dinner table. And maybe there was something in there, in those speeches that I just absorbed. I don't know what it was about him, but I have never lost my hopefulness. Never. And so what are we going to do now? We're going to teach school lunch as an academic subject. We're going to feed every kid for free in the state of California. Just start out. And we might be having a 7th grade history class of the Silk Road in India. And this might be your placemat. So you can see where the Silk Road was and what was brought along the Silk Road. And then you'll be eating the food that corresponds with that. You might be having an Indian dal. You might be having a chapati. Oh, wait, chapati. You might be having a wonderful carrot and cumin salad. A little raita on the side. And you'll be eating that lesson. You might be talking about it. You might be in China. Mm-hmm. You could be in China. Or you could be, in the Columbian Exchange, and you could be learning a language. Oops, where's my other placemats? But you could imagine just about anything. And you could have the time and attention to really digest your food along with your lessons. Because right now, kids are fed in a kind of fast food cafeteria free-for-all. And even if the food were nourishing, which I don't believe it is, or tasty, I was one of the principals for the day at the school that we're involved with in Berkeley, Martin Luther King Middle School. And it has about 1,000 kids, and they speak 17 different languages at home. So it's a really good test case for this idea. And I went around in the early days of this program, and I was watching what kids were taking from the snack bar and what they were eating and what they were throwing away. And I was astonished because most kids didn't eat. They didn't want to eat. Some kids brought something from home, but most kids would get something and just dump off everything that they didn't want to eat, the salad, the whatever, and just eat the French fries. And now, we do not have this program complete yet, but in the classroom where we're doing just this, we're feeding the food of the place that we're studying. The kids eat everything. They make it, and then they eat it. And if they grow it, and they make it, they all eat it, no matter what. It's the 22-year truth of edible education. I always say it's 6 months to kale. 6 weeks to kale. 6 months. 6 weeks to kale. I think it's about 6 days to kale.
It depends on the kale.
It depends on the kale. You're right. You're right. But it's again a very slow food idea of winning people over, winning these kids over. It's not telling them what to eat. It's allowing them to discover it and feel empowered to make their own decisions. And it's quite amazing. Really. You're all invited to come and see.
And it means that we'll all be eating better in the future, which is not
Well,
insignificant.
we're really serious about this happening maybe at the governor's race in a year and a half. I think there might be a possibility. New York City just decided to feed all of the kids in New York City for free. So we're just going to go one step further, and we're going to buy all of our food from the farmers who take care of the land. So that means that we could really buy locally from farmers living near the schools all around the state of California. And we could lift up the teachers and the farmers as our most valuable citizens. It would be a beautiful thing.
Because, I mean, certainly with the examples you have, I mean, food is one of the driving forces in so much of history. And it's, you know, the want of food, the want of particular kinds of food, the Columbian exchange, which changed the world more than anything else, maybe in the last 300 years. And yet it's never taught that way. Maybe somebody will pick up sweetness and power in an upper level history class or something. But
I have a real theory about this. I believe that we are what we eat. And in this country, most people eat fast food, very sadly, they do. And it's not just eating the food that may not be nourishing for you at all, but it's eating the values that come with food. So we are really being indoctrinated about more is better, that time is money, that cooking is drudgery, that farming is drudgery, that advertising confers value, that children shouldn't be at the table, they only like their own food, that food should be cheap when it's never been cheap. Since the beginning of civilization, it's always been something precious, something you spent most of your money on was food. And now we want it to be cheap. And we don't, and easy as well. So we are really, we have changed the world with these values. And we need to bring our children back to the human values of that, you know, sitting at the table. That we're, you know, 85% of the kids don't eat a meal at the table anymore. That it's okay to eat in your car. Whoever heard of that 50 years ago? Eating in your car.
you're in the wrong city to complain about that.
Clearly.
but still,
Yeah.
I mean,
I forgot who I was talking to.
remember, Los Angeles is where civilization went to die, right? Whereas we think the Bay Area is a nice place to spend a weekend. There's that statistic that was in an article the other day. I'm not sure if it's how accurate it was, but it said that only 10% of Americans cook. 10%.
Well, I believe that. I do. I mean, you go into these big stores and they're selling now just everything in a package ready to take home. And even, they bring it to your door and just say, put this in the oven. But when you are thinking time is money and cooking is treasury, and it takes time, that you dismiss it. When I think, of course, the cooking is great pleasure, greatest pleasure.
And if the anthropologists are correct, cooking is what makes us human.
Right. I don't know. I find that it's just kind of a run-on sentence when you don't stop and eat together in a day. I just feel like I haven't really eaten if I don't sit down at a table, and even by myself, but with friends. Truly.
That's lovely. In your book, I love the passage where you're talking about going to Versailles for the first time. What? I don't know why I got from there to there, but you go to Versailles and somehow you've been at Berkeley and you think of it as the most oppressive institution, and then you go back several years later with somebody who tells you where intensive agriculture started. It's where they started ripening in rooms. It's where so many of the traditions that you hold dear and you think are important started at a place of not just great privilege, but probably the most exaggerated great privilege in history. Are there any parallels between what's going on at the highest level of, say, restaurants now and your revelation back then?
Who are you thinking of?
What?
Like Noma?
I could be thinking of Noma, which is an extraordinary restaurant. As you know, they just abandoned their first one. They're building another restaurant about a mile away from the original one, and they're going to try to grow a huge percentage of their food. That they're very tied to what's growing in the region, and the Nordic region is not an easy place to find things to eat in January and February.
But he always manages to find something.
Yeah.
But the great thing about Versailles and that garden was that they fed 10,000 people out of that garden at Versailles. And if you've ever gone to visit it, I mean, it's kind of an amazing place. And the techniques that they had for getting things to ripen sooner and putting them up against warm walls and putting in the fertilizer from the animals, and just amazing biodynamic ideas way back when.
Urban farming has always been a tradition in Paris. You see those things in the suburbs with all those really strange walls, and people didn't even realize what they were, but they were the same things. They were using those same principles and using the warm walls, and they were spalinating things, and they were able to feed great amounts of people on a very small amount of land. That probably is a lesson for us.
Well, I think we could be coming back to our senses. Literally, we have to. Don't you want me to read that good story in here about going to New York?
Yes, it's one of my favorite of her salad stories, and there are so many.
A salad story. In the early 1970s, I think I have to start a little further down.
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing I'm responsible for in this country, something that I can take a little credit for, it's the propagation of a real salad in the United States. I was so proud of that mesclun salad that I took it to New York. In the late 70s, after the restaurant had become established, Chez Panisse was on the Playboy magazine's 25 best restaurants in the country. We were number 7. The magazine invited each restaurant on the list to cook a dish at a big fete in New York City. And immediately I thought, I'm going to make a salad. That's my dish. My close friend Marion Cunningham, who had worked with the famous chef and food writer James Beard, said, James could loan you a bowl and you could make the dressing at his house. Well, Marion, ironically enough, was a great lover of iceberg lettuce. Sure enough, James Beard loaned me this beautiful wooden bowl, and I made our Chez Panisse version of a mesclun salad with chervil and herbs and those beautiful just-picked lettuces that we brought on the plane from California. All New York was invited, and every restaurant that had been on the Playboy's list had a station. The other chefs, all men, were French and Italian, classically trained, representing restaurants from New York like Le Cercle. I respected everyone so much, and to be in that company was, well, I felt very honored. When I got there and looked around, I saw that all these chefs were making elaborate ice carvings, putting together their salmon quenelles. Someone down the way was preparing a lobster extravaganza. There was a picture of us that day before it started, and I had on an antique maroon dress with a little accordion sleeves, with a very pale blue stone sewn around the neckline, surrounded by all these men in black suits. To stand there as the only woman doing a green salad, I was so embarrassed I almost died. Amazingly, that salad was what people talked about the next day. I don't think I did anything with the presentation at all. I just served it on the plate. We didn't even have baked goat cheese with it, just bang, lettuce. But that response really woke me up. It made me realize my naivete. But I also felt a kind of pride in the simplicity of what we were doing at the restaurant. That I could think of going to New York and presenting green salad as our dish from Chez Panisse. I remember talking all night to anyone who came to my station about how James Beard had loaned me his salad bowl, as if that would give me some kind of credibility. Like, well, at least he thinks a salad is all right.
I always think of that sort of legendary time you were on you were taping with Julia Child and making a salad, and you were doing your usual tossing, and she said, "Oh, it's so vulgar when people toss salad with their hands."
She said, no, she didn't say you're so vulgar. She just said, do you always do that with your hands? And I said, well, sometimes I use them. But she also completely embarrassed me because I was peeling olives just with my hands with a little knife. And she said, oh, Alice, is that how you peel olives? And never thinking that, of course, you take a back of a knife and smash the olives, and then, of course, the olive flesh comes very easily off. But and she pretended like she didn't know, when, of course, she did.
I didn't realize that. My tapenade will be so
What?
much easier next time.
Yeah.
And there's that other famous story about when somebody at the restaurant like costed out the goat cheese salad for the first time.
When they did what?
Didn't you have somebody like do a cost analysis of what you were doing and found out that you were spending $13 to make a $8 salad?
Probably. We never paid much attention. Never. We didn't make any money for about 8 years. But after that, we sort of got the prices right. But I've never wanted an expensive restaurant, really expensive. It's the reason we opened the cafe upstairs, so that there could be a lot of, students who could come and just have a mix of people. I think it's very important that it doesn't become homogenous.
Did it start to bother you at the point when you realized that a lot of the people, huge quantity of people coming in on weekends were coming in from out of town and they basically wanted steak and potatoes?
Well, they didn't have any choice. From day one, we've only had a single menu, and this is the 46th year. And every single night downstairs, the menu has changed. So, if you want to have a steak, you got to go upstairs, and you can't always count on getting one, but there are options.
When we started, Victoria Wise was one of your first
Yes, she
chefs.
was.
And she's
The very first.
And she's a genius at feeding a lot of people very well for very little money. I mean, it's just sort of her gift, right? And that idea of Chez Panisse became so different over the next 10 years. Was it conscious or?
Well, what should we say? She served a lot of innards.
Yeah.
And we put on the menu, we didn't call them what you call them. We just said brochette provençale. And one time, Marion Cunningham's husband was with her, and he was not an adventurous eater at all. And we were doing one of those special regional dinners from Alsace. And one of the dishes was a pig's ear that was breaded and fried, okay? And he took one look at it and he said, "Oh, veal cutlet." And I just decided not to tell him. And he never forgave me, never. But it was just, it was really tasty, but it wasn't veal.
There's nothing more delicious than a well-cooked pig. It's almost a cliche in Los Angeles now, the thing of like, poaching it, cutting it thin, breading it, frying it.
Oh, yes.
Ear fries.
What?
Pig's ear fries.
Oh, pig's ears fried. Well, we eat pig's ears and tails.
Yes.
Are we having questions?
Some questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Any takers? Do you have anyone upstairs? Go ahead. Take the first one upstairs.
I'll pass the. Here we're gonna pass it. Here we go. Hi,
thank you for that. Up here. This question is for Alice. As a fellow Jersey girl, Garden State, which one of the farms was one of your favorites growing up?
The farms in New Jersey?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. I really was, well, we never went out to dinner much, and I was 13 when I left New Jersey. I know it was the Garden State back then, but not very long after that, I know that the Harvard Lampoon did an issue on New Jersey cuisine. And, you know, they did it just like the Time Life books with pictures. And one of the lessons was how to boil water. 10 pictures. And another one was fresh food arriving, and it was just dumped cans out of the back of a truck in Hoboken. So I think there wasn't a lot of farm to table. Or I think there were backyard gardens, and I know that there have been amazing gardeners that have come to the Union Square Market in New York City. And I know that there's a resurgence, but I can't tell you any names.
Next question.
This question is for Alice. Alice, you talk about how horrible it is to eat in a car, but according to your book, there's other things that you don't mind doing in a car. Would you elaborate on that?
That I was a car hop?
I'm over here. It's Ron Finley.
I beg your pardon.
It's Ron.
The question. That I don't like to eat in the car. What else do I like to do in the car?
You detest people eating in a car, but according to your memoir, there's other things that you don't mind doing in a car. I was just hoping that you elaborate on that.
I can't remember that part. I guess I didn't mind drinking in a car. Any other questions?
Yeah, over here on your right.
Hi, Alice.
Hi.
First of all, over this way.
Oh, that.
Congratulations and happy anniversary on 46 great years.
Thank you.
And what you had written in the NewYorker.com sort of story about the opening was wonderful. And it was my honor and pleasure to be there and to make your first deposit across the street. And remembering that we had about 54 or so people on staff. We had lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast was curtailed pretty quickly. And bringing up the names, Brigitte and Sharon and Jerry and all of the rest just brought me right back. And I've never eaten as well as when I worked there. We were fed the same meal as all of the guests. I think that was pretty rare at the time. And I thank you for 46 great years of teaching the country and the world how to eat well. And
Thank you.
And remembering that those were the days when Chateau d'Yquem was less than $20 a bottle, as I recall. Things have changed.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
For many people today, food has become political. There are vegans and vegetarians and pescatarians. And I'm just curious what you make of how some of those people ascribe ethical and moral values to those ways of eating, as opposed to being omnivores.
Well, I really think that people are becoming aware of what's in our food, how it's being produced, and are pretty shocked by it, and don't really know where to go. And I mean, we're in a very big place of experimenting, and there were 4 young guys who were part of a panel we had last night at the Underground Museum that are skateboarders, and I think they were all in their early 20s. And they just decided that you know, that what was offered in their neighborhood, sort of South Central, was not what they should be eating, and they became vegetarians. And then they went this step further, and they decided to do a pop-up around juices, fruit juices, and they go to the farmer's market and they buy organic food, and they just started eating this vegetarian food, and it was amazing to hear them speak about how good they felt and how it helped them to be these athletes that they are, and it just changed their whole perspective. And I mean, it was kind of, you know, I just thought how brave and how strong-willed, and just seeing what feels good for your body. It's a beautiful thing. So I'm in the Michael Pollan place about eating, that we have to eat what's local and think about the traditional foods and the grains and the whole grains and how things are grown. And it's terribly, terribly important, and people are experimenting in all different ways, and we're trying to accommodate them at the restaurant with a fixed price menu. And we're always available for, I mean, we have dishes available for vegetarians. And it's something serious. Is that kind of how you feel about it?
Yeah, there's, I think with eating now, you have a lot of people almost choosing tribes, and some of the some of it is team vegan, and some of it is team vegetarian, some of it is team nose to tail. They're the people who will actually clamor for the pig's ears and the spleens. Some people won't eat meat, and some people eat. Like I suspect, both of us will barely eat meat unless we've personally been introduced to the farmer.
That's right.
And there's room for all of it.
And our final question for the evening?
So this is a complete hypothetical, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you were on death row and it came time to choose your last meal, what would you choose, Alice?
What would I choose?
Yeah, for your last meal.
I could have anything? Oh my God. Well, I think I demand a chicken spit roasted. And what else? A big fire.
And what would the wine be?
Well, I'd have to have a glass of Domaine Tempier rosé. The woman at Domaine Tempier, Lulu Perrault, is turning 100 years old on the 10th of December this year, the 11th. Well, do I have time? Just read one little paragraph
Please.
in the last of the book. Do I?
Yes, please.
You must.
I always joked with Bob Shearer that when he lost his bid for Congress, I was so disappointed that I opened Chez Panisse. I was deeply disillusioned about politics, and opening the restaurant. And by opening the restaurant, I really thought I was dropping out. I was going to do my own thing, no politics, just my little place. But it became political, because as it turns out, food is the most political thing in our lives. Eating is an everyday experience, and the decisions that we make about what we eat have daily consequences. And those daily consequences can change the world.